get rolling. It's great to see a lot of friendly faces and a good many of you familiar faces for one reason or another. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm on my little tour, traveling across the 4 Western Synods and connecting with people. And the idea is to give you a bit of an update on some of the developments that are going on at LTS, and perhaps even more importantly, to have an opportunity to hear from you. So I'm interested in your thoughts, your questions, your concerns, your ideas. And so at the end, we'll have a fair bit of time, I think, to converse about that. So the President's Tour is something that, well, this is my second time doing it. And the reason I do it is that we're at a significant turning point. And so that's what was happening last time. And actually, the last time I did it, we were in the process of moving, or just about to move out from the old Seminary Crescent building into our new space with the other 2 seminaries in the Saskatoon Theological Union. And this time, we're seeing significant developments both in how we operate as LTS and how LTS connects to the Saskatoon Theological Union. So we'll be talking about a variety of those pieces this evening. And before we get there, we're going to see a video that gives you a bit of an overview of where we are and where we're going, and I think is kind of helpful in connecting you to some of the people and some of the thoughts and ideas. Before I go there, I want to say a special welcome to our Alberta and the Territories board members. I want to tell you that you have, for your seminary, the best board. We really honestly have a terrific board. These people work really well together, and we've been through a lot of transformation over the past few years. We are the board in motion, and it's only because this is a really good group of people who work really well together, bring a lot of skills, a lot of talents, and most of all, a lot of deep commitment to LTS and most of all to God's mission in the world. And so your 3 ABT members are Lorraine Ray, lay member, who is our esteemed, and I really mean that, definitely esteemed chair. And hiding away in the back there is Pastor Christian Wold, who is the rostered member from ABT, and of course Bishop Larry showing up in LTS wear. Good stuff, you know. You too can dress with LTS. I'm happy to connect you to the website where you can order LTS material. Yeah, so I'm really pleased to welcome you here this evening and to be able to connect with the whole group of you. So let's start then by rolling the video. Over to you.
We have seen churches closing. We've seen our demographics get older. We've seen numbers get smaller.
It would be very devastating. The church is a very central part of our community.
So we're doing something about it. The history of Lutheran Theological Seminary Saskatoon goes well back to train pastors locally for our congregations here. We still remember the glory days of the 1960s when all of our churches were full and where everyone went to church and where Christian culture was supported by everything that we did, and we're not seeing that anymore. Now it really means that faith has to matter to people to show up.
We're transforming LTS. We're preparing people for many and new kinds of ministries in various ways. Lay people, deacons, pastors, through certificates and degrees. We're moving classes into various places across Western Canada. With our Anglican and United Church partners, we are building a common faculty, shared administration, and finding ways to create mutually supportive governance. We are focusing on training leaders, leaders for the church that is and for the church that will be, while sustaining our Lutheran identity. We invite you to share this journey with us.
20 years ago, students would have to move to campus, do 2 years of full-time study, go on a one-year internship, and then return again to campus for a full year, which was really difficult for spouses and for children, and for any students who had ailing parents. For them, seminary almost wasn't an option. The way that we're doing seminary now is students are able to take the pace that they want to, and they don't have to move their families. And that opens up the diversity of students that we have. When I went to seminary, it was either second career people or single people. And now we have students who have young families, students who are caring for older members of the church, students who have other work. And so they can either take a full-time approach and get it done quickly, or they can do it part-time and take it at the speed that they need to for their calling, their multiple callings.
Yeah, I never thought at 64 years old that I would be considering another vocation. Our church is just south of Riding Mountain National Park, so 3 hours northwest of Winnipeg. So there was no leadership in the church after previous retirement. So the only way that I would be able to take this on is to fast track through the alternate route to ordination. And if I didn't have this opportunity with LTS, we wouldn't have leadership in our church.
One of the things that's central to the work that we do is ensuring that our students encounter God and people in different contexts across Canada and around the world. So our students travel, and our hope is that they will encounter different ways of being and learn to understand different ways of God speaking to us in the world.
Coming from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which is probably considered one of the best institutions in Africa, coming to the Lutheran Theological Seminary was quite eye-opening. I can say that this seminary exceeded beyond measure what I had expected from a seminary. The kind of professors that you have at LTS is world-class. It was just a blessing.
Very, very intelligent, highly educated, and yet at the same time, they were able to take complex theological or biblical concepts and explain them in a way that was so much easier for us to understand. The classes that they're offering, they're continuously looking at the curriculum, trying to decide if changes need to be made to help better prepare the students that are attending. One of the classes that I took, I think it's a couple of years ago now, is queer theologies, for example. So addressing challenges that some of the people in the Christian community are facing, and also addressing the diversity, addressing God's diversity.
Deacons are a rare breed within the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada. But one of the things I've really appreciated about LTS is they recognize that the ministry of deacons has an important place in the church today and in the future. And they are really striving and continuing to evolve their program so that it reflects the uniqueness of diaconal ministry.
One of the core priorities of our strategic plan is to focus on relationships, growing with our partners, the College of Emmanuel and St. Chad in the Anglican Church of Canada, and St. Andrew's College in the United Church of Canada. With them, we are stronger. Our classrooms are richer, and our capacity for learning is much greater.
They bring expertise that we don't necessarily have. We have professors at the other colleges that are teaching biblical studies, which is not something that the Lutheran Seminary has in its wheelhouse right now. Worship and liturgy, other classes like that. And that works really well because it allows us to offer different perspectives. It allows us to let people who are experts in their field in biblical studies really get into that, while at the same time the Lutheran Seminary and each college will have their own sort of specific Lutheran content that allows us to get more deeply. So it allows our students to get sort of the breadth of knowledge that we have, the ecumenical engagement, and also the depth and uniqueness of Lutheran theology, and to share that in the classrooms.
We are keeping our identity as 3 denominational colleges, but working as closely together as we possibly can, including on a common program for a degree. And to do that symbolizes, in a way, the goal of ecumenism, which is to say we can be proud of our denominational background, and we can bring that to the table, and then we recognize that others are feeling the same way and doing the same thing, and that only adds to the richness of our experience and the potential for our ministry together.
It was clear to me the history that exists between LTS and St. Andrews is one that's rich. It reaches back 40 years, and it has been grounded in many ways in informal, deep relationships. As I have journeyed and as the pandemic came into our lives, it synthesized the importance of that traditional relationship and the reality that to formalize it would allow us to do more together than we've ever been able to on our own.
We are hoping for a richer church today and tomorrow, and your skills and your interests and your sense of possibility and creativity can help us to make that possible.
Our classroom.
Our classroom.
Our classroom.
Our classroom is Western Canada.
deacons in the church, as well as training people to be pastors and training pastors and fostering their skills. And doing this with people across the 4 Western Synods. So let's see the next slide. Are we up? Okay, the next one. Can we get to the next slide? There we go. Our classroom is Western Canada. So our classroom is Western Canada is a title that we have given to a new way of being seminary, this new way for us. We are seeking to connect across Western Canada. You see, traditionally we've been called Lutheran Theological Seminary Saskatoon, and that's kind of where we're based. And it's good to be based there, but historically what that's meant is that predominantly our classes have also been there. And so we have talked about engaging with issues, engaging with mission across Western Canada. We have taught our students about going to their neighborhoods and going to their cities and going to their villages and finding out what's going on and figuring out how to connect their mission to those contexts. Predominantly we've done that in classroom in Saskatoon. And there's something that's fundamentally at odds about trying to suggest that what you have to do is get out there and figure out what's going on in mission and what are the kind of ministry possibilities in your world while doing that, within a classroom in Saskatoon. And so we are changing the model. And I'm going to talk more about changing the model, but I'm going to talk for the moment a little more about the model in general. So it involves offering classes across the 4 Western Synods, trying to locate them in different places, as well as continuing to do some in Saskatoon. And it also involves us in doing more hybrid and online work so that more and more our classes are available in online formats. And I'm pleased to say the whole thing, I've got to give a shout out to the Lilly Endowment, because it isn't every day that somebody gives you $1 million to do something like this. And for us, that's been pretty significant. But I'm going to talk about an example of what this looks like concretely, a class that Dr. Keiko actually has taught, and how that class has changed. So there used to be a class that we taught, and it's got a heritage. It may not always have had the same title or exactly the same format, but it's been around more or less forever. And it's called Leadership in the Parish, or historically it's called Leadership in the Parish. And historically, as Leadership in the Parish, what it is for those people who are going to be pastors, at some point in their studies, they have to do this course, Leadership in the Parish, where they work on all of those basic leadership skills that you need if you're going to be a parish pastor. They're just a whole bunch of kind of practicalities and kind of how you face issues, how you relate to councils, how you, what are you going to have to, what are the documents you have to fill out? All those kinds of basic practical skills. Leadership in the parish. There is no longer a course called Leadership in the Parish. There is now a course called Leadership in the Church. And that's a shift from seeing the world completely from the perspective of parishes to seeing the extent to which we have to connect with one another across the synods, to how we have to see ourselves as part of a church that is connected to the world. It's about a whole variety of different skills, and perhaps most importantly, it's about training lay leaders, deacons, and pastors, so that there's a whole different set of skills that's involved. And part of what's going on is a reflection on how it is to function as a team, and how you're going to do that in connection to the ministries that are in the world. Let's raise the next slide. We meet there in mission. It's the next slide. There we go. So we meet there in mission. So what is it to meet there in mission? Well, leadership in the church. This past year, when Dr. Keiko taught leadership in the church, it started out with a portion in Alberta. It started out, in fact, in Red Deer, with a portion there. And then they went and visited Bentley, Alberta, and spent some time in Bentley, Alberta. Now, aside from the fact that Bentley's a nice town, why on earth would one go and take a class and spend time in Bentley, Alberta? Well, you would do that because, in fact, it's one of those rural parishes that I've just talked about that faces challenges around leadership and what its future is going to be, and how it's going to be supported, and how it's going to connect to the larger church community. And so it's actually possible, and was possible for this class, to go and actually spend time with people in Bentley, Alberta, actually in this conversation. So it's not just like in the classroom in Saskatoon, somebody standing up and saying, you know, these are some of the challenges. It's actually a chance to sit and talk with the people. So that's the first part. So then there was a second part, and that second part was based in Winnipeg. And you will actually have seen pictures from that, as some of the portions of the video were actually taken in Winnipeg. That's where Dr. Keiko was when she was speaking. And the people who were in there studying, first of all, the person who was speaking, the guy in the checked shirt, that was Paul Gers. He's national staff with the ELCIC. So it was an opportunity to spend time with national staff. And that space they were in, that's what used to be the national offices of the ELCIC. They just moved. But that's, so some of you may even have found that space kind of familiar. I know that I was there a few times. And so there is actually a chance, you know, when they're in Winnipeg, there's a chance to engage with the various ministries and various ways of functioning of the national church. What else can you do in Winnipeg? Well, they also visited the Museum of Human Rights. And why would you visit the Museum of Human Rights if you're talking about leadership in the church? Well, you would do that because you're actually trying to get to grips with those issues of what it is to be in a church, in a context in which we're becoming very aware of a whole kind of history of complexities around human rights and the ways in which we have related to people, including Indigenous people, and all the kinds of complexities of that history, and those kinds of contemporary issues, and how are we supposed to relate to them? And that's one context in which to connect to them. What else can you do? Well, they also visited the Urban, which is a downtown Lutheran ministry in Winnipeg, and we're able to see something of what it is to do ministry in an urban downtown in the contemporary context. That, folks, is what leadership in the church looks like today. That's a whole different way of imagining that course. And that's a whole different way of imagining what it is to be seminary. That's what our classroom in Canada, our classroom is Western Canada, is about. It's about kind of connecting all across that space. And you see, this is the title, it's an official project, right? You know, you don't write a grant proposal without an official title. And the thing about writing an official title is that if you're an academic, it's supposed to be long, and it's got to have at least a colon in it. You know, you can't just, I mean, there just aren't brief titles that are academic. I think it's not even allowed. So the full title is, Our Classroom is Western Canada, We Meet There in Mission. And so that second slide that you saw, We Meet There in Mission, that's what it's about. It's about, we aren't just seeing Western Canada as our classroom, we're actually seeing it as the context in which we show up and we engage with the people who are there and encounter the mission that they are living and encounter the mission context in which they're functioning, so that we can actually prepare people to engage with those kinds of contexts when they're no longer in our classrooms. And so it's about connecting to places and connecting to local mission. Another thing that our classroom is Western Canada is about is actually being accessible. And so part of the point is that it becomes possible, when we show up in your neighborhood, it's possible for you to do a class with us. Classes do occur here in Calgary. And part of the reason that accessibility works that way is that we're no longer assuming that all of our faculty and all of the people who work with us will necessarily be focused in Saskatoon. Dr. Keiko lives in Calgary. I divide my time between Saskatoon and Kelowna. We're connecting to the 4 Western Synods in a very different way from the way that we used to. We used to be in Saskatoon, and we would go out and kind of connect to people and then, fly back to Saskatoon. Now there's a sense that what we're trying to do is feel that we are really embedded in and with people across the 4 Western Synods, and engaged with the synods in a kind of ongoing sort of way. And that means that we hope to be more accessible to you, right? We hope to be not just able to offer classes in different places, but actually to be there with people, to be there with the synods as they walk through the challenges that they walk through, and as they see the possibilities that they see. And this is all about being a seminary of today and tomorrow for the church of today and tomorrow. And one of the things that was on that slide, we meet there in mission, was this language, reimagining our church. And what we're doing is participating in the effort of reimagining our church, but it's not just us participating in an effort. That's actually technical language of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, because in 2019, the National Church accepted a particular document, Reimagining Our Church Public Ministry in the ELCIC, that asks us to rethink what it is to be church, to move away from a model that, in the language of reimagining our church, in the language of the document, was pastor-centric and focused on pastors and their leadership, and move to a church that is more diaconal, where diaconal means, yes, talking about deacons, but it means also focusing on service in a different sort of way, where diaconal is about service. And so why have we shifted to that model? Well, you see, in the immediate let me step back for a sec. There are 3 ways to grow a church, as far as I know, and that's grow in terms of numbers, but that's also just grow. There are 3 ways to do that, and 2 of them really served us in the post-World War II era, and those 2 are immigration and procreation. Immigration and procreation gave us full buildings. People were just coming to us. And so we were building buildings, and we were training pastors, and this was completely appropriate, because if people are coming to you, it is appropriate hospitality. And you see, the 3rd way to grow churches is proclamation. And that was an appropriate context for proclamation, because people came to us. They came into our buildings, often as kids, but sometimes, as families are just, wandering in the doors. And people came to us, and proclamation meant commonly speaking to them from the pulpit, but it also means, connecting with them personally in congregations. And most of us have memories of that period, right? Big choirs, Sunday schools that, you've got to build more rooms because there aren't enough rooms. I remember Sunday school when I was a kid. I remember a Sunday school class that we ran out of Sunday school rooms in the church I attended as a kid. And so for one of my Sunday school years, we were in, the space under the stairs, the one where, it's flat on the floor, but the ceiling kind of goes like this, and it's great that you've got little kids because actually they can talk more. That's where I had one of the classes. Another year, my Sunday school class was in the kitchen, and that, of course, was a problem when sort of service ended, because then people expected to be able to get into the kitchen to prepare for coffee hour, but anyway, that's what it was like. People were coming into the churches. You may have noticed that that's not happening anymore, that's not kind of working the same way anymore. People aren't walking in our doors. That means that proclamation works differently. Immigration and procreation aren't on our side. Proclamation's what we've got. And proclamation takes on a different kind of context. It's actually about getting out of our buildings and actually connecting to a world in need, a world where God is speaking and where God is transforming the world, and where we're called to connect and called to see possibilities for God's kingdom and to participate in possibilities for God's kingdom wherever they occur in the context of our lives. That's what we're about. So I want to talk a bit about something called the Cross-Synod Recruitment Group. So yes, if we can get that slide. So you see, one of the challenges, it's all great to talk about this kind of vision, but actually, how do you find people to serve as leaders in this kind of context? And so we have created this group that we call the Cross-Synod Recruitment Group. Our board created, it's part of our strategic plan, that involves people from different synods. And I'm going to tell you that ABT Synod is making a huge contribution. And there are two people from ABT Synod who are participating. And one of them with us tonight is Wayne Street. Hi, Wayne. And one of them with us the other night in Edmonton, Deacon Sarah Rudd. And as I say, we've got lay people and deacon. There we go. And so what we're doing is we're actually having that conversation about what the church is going to be tomorrow. And okay, what's that mean for recruitment? Because if you're recruiting leaders for a church like that, where you're looking for lay leaders, you're looking for deacons, and you're looking for pastors, it's going to happen differently. It's going to happen differently from our traditional recruitment that has focused specifically on developing pastors. And I want to tell you that there are a couple of pieces to be added to that. One of which is that we're looking at, we work with different patterns, and the people that we have in our student community are starting to look different, and they're going to look different into the future. One of the things that people commonly ask is, well, how are you doing for recruitment? How are the numbers, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm going to say that through the first couple of years of COVID, they haven't been great, because that's actually just blown everything sideways, including our recruitment efforts. This year, we're seeing a quite substantial number of students joining us, but they look different. Instead of them just being everybody doing a Master of Divinity degree and looking to become a pastor, we've got people, you saw Heather Howdell Parrott up there, she's just graduated. She's the alternative route to ordination. And so the people doing the alternative route to ordination are people who are moving through a different process and generally serving in a specific locality where there's a need for pastoral leadership. And they do become pastors. Technically, the official ELCIC language is the alternative route for admission to the roster of pastors of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, ARFARP of ELCIC or something, but we've gone with alternative route to ordination. ARO is just short and covers it. And so they follow a different route with us. And where our number of people studying for the diaconate, that's also growing. And so we have a diaconal certificate that will soon actually be a diaconal diploma, because we're making some changes to the program. And we also have people who are doing their Master of Divinity degree to become pastors, but we also have people who are doing in the Master of Theological Studies, which is commonly a degree that people do for academic interest as they want to develop and understand Christianity differently. And we are also seeing significant growth in our Doctor of Ministry program, which is the degree, an advanced degree, that students do when they're already in a ministry context and they already have a theology degree. And what they're trying to do is help us to reimagine our church. And they're also trying to foster their skills for a changing church. And so that's kind of where we are right at the moment. So it's, it's a good good group of students this year, probably 15 or so starting in the fall. But it's not just like MDivs, it's kind of the whole range. And the other piece that we have coming along is that we're also adding a lay certificate, not this fall, it'll probably be for the next fall, but a lay leadership certificate to specifically foster lay ministry. And of course, we have our Leading in Faith Today curriculum, which is available already for people, and that's kind of a separate program that the seminary has created and supports in order to train and prepare lay people. And that has historically been available as curriculum, so you can offer courses in your parish. I think there are like 22 of them, but it is now going online with a combined Anglican United, now Lutheran effort, ChurchX to make the courses available electronically. So there's this kind of whole range. And so when we talk about, you know, a bumper recruitment year, it looks different from what it did. Let's pull up the slide about student funding. So I am pleased to say that those who degrees and certificates with us, the cost for the degree or certificate is minimal. We are able to offer really strong financial support for students, and that's first of all thanks to the generosity and support of people across Western Canada, indeed across Canada and in the world. Many of them members of the ELCIC. Some years ago, one of my predecessors as president, Faith Rohrbaugh, realized that there wasn't enough money around to support students, and she really strongly encouraged people to give to that, and people have responded wonderfully, generously, and beautifully. And so now we have great quantities of money for support of students. Now we continue to need money, but it's predominantly for support of other things. I can also add that people who want to do audit courses, which means you just do it for interest with us, and you don't have to do assignments or whatever, but you just kind of join us, commonly online. The cost is $75, which is a stone cold bargain, I tell you. I mean, think about what you can buy for $75 these days. You can buy a whole course with you know, first-class faculty with LTS. I think that's pretty impressive. One of the things that I want to go back to and talk a bit about, sort of just kind of bringing all these pieces together, is now the faculty structure that LTS has. I've talked about kind of Lutheran formation, and I've talked about leadership, and I've talked about the way in which those play into courses. And so Keiko just had to leave us for a minute, but she is our Horton Professor of Theology. And so a lot of that Lutheran formation stuff is her responsibility, her bailiwick. And we're very pleased that she, so that appointment was official in January, that she became our Horton Professor of Theology. She has done a variety of things with us for some years. And we also have a brand new announcement at this point. Some of you will have heard that we are pleased to have Dr. Kyle Schiffelbein Guerrero. And just so you know, you have to be a Lutheran to be able to pronounce Kyle Schiffelbein Guerrero. But actually, he mostly goes by Dr. KSG because that seems to be an easy way for people to get around the pronunciation. He's going to be joining us as our first Grace Professor of Leadership. And the Grace Fund for Faculty is what we've been fundraising for the last couple of years. And I'm pleased to say that we're now in a position to support a professor with it. And so we have a professor of leadership as part of our seminary. And I tell you, that's a rare thing in seminaries. As far as we know, there isn't another one in Canada. That's how seriously we take the kind of work that we are doing in bringing these pieces together. And you see, that's how those degrees and certificates are going to make sense. They're going to make sense because of that kind of support that you're going to see from our faculty. And if we go to the next slide, I just want to say one more word about LTS and connecting with us and how we communicate. Of course, you know, I do these little President's Tour things from time to time, and I'm thrilled that you're here and hoping that at the end you will have questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, things to share. And so that's one way to speak to us. Another, of course, is your board members, as I've mentioned. They're active and they're connected, and they're happy to hear from you and happy to share with you. And so please do connect with your board members. Also, we're actually pretty proud of our newsletter. We actually think that we do a reasonably good job of kind of communicating who we are through the newsletter. And if you're not getting the newsletter and you would like to, then you can sign up at lutherantheological.ca, our website. And the thing about the newsletter these days is you can either get it in the contemporary digital format, where it just kind of pops up in your inbox, or you can get it old style on beautiful glossy paper, if that's how you prefer to read it. So let's move on. And now we're actually going to start talking about the Saskatoon Theological Union, because that's an important piece of our development. As you saw in the video, as the three of us heads were kind of having that vigorous conversation in the chapel. So the Saskatoon Theological Union. So as I started with LTS, with the vision statement, I want to start with the STU with the vision statement. And it's actually got a lot of parallel. And I'm just going to kind of let you read it there and just kind of focus on some bits. First of all, it focuses on participating in God's transformative work in the world, sharing the good news of God's love. It's about that witness to God's transformative work in the world. That same kind of voice is being expressed there. And it's inspired by the particular heritages. So again, we pick up, where LTS has this kind of specific heritage. This is the set of our three heritages carried forward, and it's about preparing leaders for a whole variety of roles, lay ordained, scholarly, teaching, the whole thing. In northern, western, and Pacific Canada and beyond. We had to say all that because, as you may well know, LTS itself serves from east of Thunder Bay all the way out to Tofino and up to Whitehorse and Yellowknife. We cover a lot of territory. It's kind of fun. We're in the Association of Theological Schools with a lot of schools in the U.S., and they just can't get their head around the idea of a small seminary that serves like that much territory. They talk about, doing the sort of kind of President's Tour thing that I have, and they'll go, 50, maybe even 100 miles, it's just not the same thing. Let's go to the next slide. Common faculty and curriculum. It has been true for decades that when you did a degree with LTS, you could also do classes with the United Church Seminary or the Anglican Seminary. But we've moved into a different mode. It's now the case that we have created a common faculty. We're all one faculty working together now. So we are building a shared curriculum so that if you were to start with us doing an MDiv in this coming summer, then you would be in the same curriculum that the students in the other colleges are, and the overwhelming majority of your courses would actually be courses that will be with students from the other two colleges, and many of your courses will be taught by faculty from the other colleges. And actually a significant number will actually have a variety of faculty teaching them, teaching different portions, because we're really trying to team up as a faculty. And so I'm the chair of the common faculty right at the moment, and we have an academic dean, so we share an academic dean Dr. Lynn Caldwell from St. Andrews, and Dr. Keiko is the faculty secretary. And so we really, from all of the academic perspectives, we function as one faculty building a shared curriculum. Now there are individual components, so there are pieces that are, specifically Lutheran formation courses that are actually part of that curriculum, and there may be students from some of the other schools in them, but predominantly those will be Lutherans. And if we could get the next slide. In order to support this, we're actually building an organizational structure together. You see, the Saskatoon Theological Union has been around for like 50 years. But it's actually commonly the only formal thing on paper that's been there that's combined the STU is access to one another's libraries and a shared librarian. That's been basically it. There hasn't been anything formal. It's actually just about basically a kind of friendly relationship that in which sometimes we're closer and sometimes we're further away, and yes, you can go into their classes and whatnot, but it's been informal. Now it's becoming formal, and we now have a common council with representatives from the 3 different seminaries. We are considering the question of whether STU, Saskatoon Theological Union, is a helpful name for us, or whether we want to think about that. And so that's kind of an ongoing conversation, and some of you may have contributed to that conversation. We're also moving into incorporation, so we're actually going to create a legal Saskatoon Theological Union. You see, we have a shared library. All of our books are in the same library, all of the electronic resources, the same set of electronic resources, but St. Andrews College employs some of the staff, and we employ some of the staff, and nobody really knows who's in charge. Why? Well, because they're all STU people, except that they're not STU employees, because the STU can't employ anybody. So somebody's got to employ them. The DMIN director, who directs the whole Doctor of Ministry program for the STU, well, we employ the Doctor of Ministry director right at the moment. That's not always been the case. Sometimes St. Andrews, and that's no way to run a situation, because in fact, nobody knows about lines of support or responsibility or any of those sorts of things. And in terms of funding, we just kind of keep sending one another invoices. So we're actually trying to build together an incorporated structure. And for the first time, as far as I can tell, since 2004, we actually met as 3 boards together in a shared board meeting a few weeks ago. And that was a huge step forward, I think, in terms of our relationships. Because as you well know, personal relationships count for a lot in this. And starting to develop those personal relationships and develop a vision together, I think, has been hugely helpful. So I was there the last time the three boards met. So it was quite exciting to see this happen again. And we also have a partnership with St. Thomas More College, which is a Roman Catholic liberal arts college on the University of Saskatchewan campus. And they really function as our university connection in some important ways, because there is no religious studies program in the University of Saskatchewan anymore. What there is at St. Thomas More College, there's a religion and culture program. And so they're kind of the religion connection that we work with. We're also building a summer study conference together. Last year we had one on religious community in a digital world. And this year we're having one, it's the language is reweaving. I can never quite remember the whole title, but it's predominantly about decolonization and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and that's June 20th to 22nd. And if you're interested, just go to our website and you can find all the information there, and you're more than welcome to join and participate. And we're sharing a library advisor with St. Thomas More College. They're bringing in a new librarian, and that person will work for us very part-time. So, see the last slide? Yeah, so this is whom we're seeking to be. We're seeking to be a strong Lutheran voice in strong ecumenical partnerships as we move into the future church together, seeing those possibilities and facing those challenges together. and you know, living into some of those pieces about digital church and some of those pieces about church complexity and all those leadership bits. Again, as a strong strong Lutheran voice in strong ecumenical partnerships. So thank you. And this is now your space and your time, because I want to hear from you. I don't just want to I know what I said. I want to hear what you have to say. So how about if I just make this mic available? Anybody who's got something they want to share or say or question? It's all yours. Sure. Thanks, Andrew.
I'll be the guinea pig. Yeah, I just want to ask, why did Dr. Keiko give me such bad marks on that stuff? No, I'm just interested, Bill, and because we've got this move to online and off-campus stuff, how are you as a seminary going to kind of still connect students together? Because I think that's one of the most important parts about not only just in terms of kind of your educational experience, but also post-educational stuff is kind of that connection. So
yeah, okay, yeah, very good question. So there are a couple of things I want to say. One of which is that we've been working in an intensive model for about a decade now, and the intensive model means that students come and are with us for a week or 2 weeks to study, and then they go home. And that, you know, that has been the case for quite a while, and it will be the case in the new STU curriculum. So the 3 STU schools are adopting that model. And our experience has been that at an informal level, that mostly works pretty well in terms of students developing relationships, that students do find one another. Especially COVID kind of made that a bit difficult in the in the kind of couple of years when students couldn't be together on campus, because we find that being together somewhere, it doesn't have to be in Saskatoon, but being together somewhere in person is an important part of creating those relationships. But we have also found that those relationships do, at an informal level, sustain. And so we have the sense that that's a piece that is kind of looking after itself. What we have found to be really difficult is formal relationships amongst students, in the sense of supporting traditionally the student union of LTS. It's officially the LTS SU, has actually been a strong group, doing a fair bit of organizing, some interesting events. I've got, some exciting memories, things like the Kairos blanket exercise, some of you may have seen. The LTS SU brought us that, and just all sorts of fun stuff that historically happened, and that's proving tough to sustain in the intensive model with a significant amount of distance class. And so what we have done, and what we've had this conversation at the STU level and realized that actually the other colleges are facing a similar kind of challenge. And so what we've decided is we're going to work together with all the students and see what we can do about something that is actually an STU shared set of relationships, and we're not sure how that's going to work, in part because we actually want the students to be able to make a lot of the decisions around that, rather than being particularly directive, though we intend to be quite supportive. Starting this fall, seeing what the STU can develop in terms of kind of formal student stuff, and begin that conversation about, okay, how do we formally support these relationships and support that communal life in a world where they're not on campus in the same way as they used to be. So thanks, an excellent question, Andrew. Others, there's a mic here for you. Okay. Okay, Keiko. Mike's here if you just want to snag it.
I can also add something about the formation of students online. So there's a couple other pieces that we're working on. And one is we are having specific Lutheran formation classes that will be starting. And those will be happening in the different synods across Western Canada, but they'll be specifically on-site classes. So at least once a year, maybe twice a year, students will be gathering together in person, just not necessarily in Saskatoon. So that's part of the in-person formation. And the other thing that we're excited about is Dr. Kyle Scheffelbein-Guerrero, one of the things, his expertise is in digital church. And so we're hoping that he'll also help us to begin to think about how do we learn as a seminary and then teach as a seminary how to form digital community. And so that's going to be a learning for us as a seminary and also a learning for our students. So really taking both of those tracks, because yes, formation and being in community is just such a crucial part of seminary formation, and it forms those relationships that continue on after you graduate. And so we really don't want to let go of that. That's part of the importance of being a seminary. So those are the two approaches to that, just to add.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, especially that piece about Kyle, which I think is tremendously important. One of the reasons that we're really excited about Kyle coming to join us is he has really thought deeply and broadly about what it is to be church, what it is to be community in a digital age, and some ways in which that concretely happens. He was actually one of the people who spoke at our Religious Community in a Digital World conference. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
I'll just talk about. My question is, hello, there we go. Don't have to yell now. My question is, how do we use artificial intelligence?
Wow.
You got an answer for that?
Thanks, Greg.
Okay.
Do you want to? Yeah, because actually Keiko's been doing some of the thinking about this, so I'm happy to.
So I'll use the mic so the Zoom people can hear, because I think one of your questions is about chatbot. I mean, so we know now that there is artificial intelligence programs out there where you can type in questions and they give you all kinds of answers. And so how do you teach and engage information around that? And I will say, actually, the original challenge actually was not chatbot for teaching, it was Wikipedia, because students can look anything up. So it really became, how do we teach students to think? And chatbot is just pushing us to do that more and more. How do we teach students to think? So I asked chatbot to write a sermon, and it wrote a passable sermon. Like, I wouldn't have known it was written by a chatbot. So there's all kinds of theological questions, but I think some of the practical questions is, yeah, that's part of what we have to start thinking about is how do we address all of these tools that are coming in front of us at a really rapid pace and see, I mean, tools are neutral, so how do we integrate them in ways that are helpful rather than harmful? But yeah, I think that's, I mean, all of these cutting edge things is stuff we're all really looking at and not denying. We are accepting that they're out there and trying to look at it. But chatbot is just I could go on about chatbot, but it's very cool.
And I would add that actually in my course on globalization and ethics, we're going to be talking, I'm not sure how much I'm going to manage this year, because it's something that I'm just sort of thinking about and starting to assemble resources. But I think in future years, a significant part of that course is actually going to be a reflection on what artificial intelligence is and how we kind of think and live in relation to it. In part because what most AI programs that we encounter at the moment do is it's not exactly what we think of intelligence, human intelligence doing. What it predominantly does is it turns to kind of all the resources that it can find on the internet and assembles something that makes sense to it from all of those resources. And when you are assembling all of those resources, then what you're doing is something that's a very interesting form of globalization. And there's a very interesting dynamic there in terms of picking up all of those resources all over the place, and therefore taking a kind of ownership of all of those resources. There's also something very interesting of the kind of potential there is for a certain homogenization of thought. By virtue of those systems actually, because they're statistical, and they're all working with the same resources, so that there's something there that that has some impact on what creativity and individuality start to mean. So the point is that there's a whole kind of reflection there that I'm not ready to deliver at this point, but it's actually going to be an important part of that conversation. So. Wait, was that anywhere toward answering your question, Greg?
It's just so broad.
Yeah.
Right now, if you're not aware of AI and not thinking about it, not using it, you'll get behind in about a year.
Yep.
You'll never catch up. So either you get on board or you don't.
Yeah. Well, and it's because we've got to do a lot of thinking about it. And, even software companies at the moment are saying, actually, no, you really have to think about this. So yeah. It's not just a world you dive into. Well, maybe. One of the things I'm going to be encouraging students to do is to think critically about the theology of Chatbot Pastor, as if they do something like, and one of the things I'm thinking at some point I may introduce as an assignment is actually, okay, so get Chatbot to write something, and then tell me how good that is, and why it's strong and why it's not, because it's a very interesting way of going at critiquing the theology. And there's one of the fun things that Chatbot creates as a possibility is that it's actually really cruel to get students to critique one another's sermons from a really vigorous theological perspective. It's not cruel at all to get the students to tell Chatbot to create a sermon, or for me to create a sermon and then stick it up on the wall and say, okay, so let's go. What's good about this sermon? What's bad? Tell me where the theological problems are. Tell me where the delivery problems are. Tell me how it connects to your community. And they can be right rough because this isn't attached to any of the personalities in the class. So there are all sorts of possibilities there that I see that could be kind of fun. So, as well as some big philosophical questions that are kind of interesting. Other questions or thoughts? Okay. Well, in that case, thank you very much. Really appreciate your coming, and I believe that there's some coffee and some goodies outside. Is that correct, Christian? Yeah, on the far wall on one side there will be some coffee and some hot water tea and some treats. So we'll enjoy and continue the conversation. Yeah, so you're welcome to stay with us, and if you had some thoughts or questions you weren't sure you quite had formulated to pump into a mic, but would like to buttonhole me with afterward, I'm more than happy to talk to you. And thank you so much for coming out and spending this pleasant evening in here with us. So thank you.